Noah ditched me on the side of the road to keep his other lady happy. I ended up in a gnarly car crash. Just when I was on the brink of kicking the bucket, a flood of comments started zipping across the night sky. My unforgettable first love was gone. Then it turned into the same tired tale of a stand-in, stepping up and getting trashed repeatedly. Daniel was the most pitiful of all. He still had no clue that the person he'd been loving for ages was right beside him when she passed. With the last ounce of strength I had, I punched in my arch-nemesis's number. He still didn't realize that the one he'd adored was so close when she died. Using the last bit of energy I had, I dialed Daniel's number. I didn't pass away and ended up in his hands instead. He grabbed my chin, a chilly grin spreading across his face. "The day I die, Miss Rachel, you're coming with me." The barrage exploded, even in death. He wanted to be buried beside me. Isn't that real love? Nah. He's head over heels. Wait, what? Love? What love? He clearly wants me dead. The next moment, Daniel leaned in and kissed me. Henry and I had a massive fight, and he tossed me out on the roadside. We clashed over Emma, a new intern at his company. They say she's my spitting image, just younger and more chill. While in the car, Henry got a distress call from her. On the phone, she was bawling her eyes out, saying she'd had too much to drink and some thugs were hassling her outside a bar. I turned to Henry and gave him a dirty look. Why didn't she just call the cops if she was being harassed? Why hit you up? Emma heard me over the phone and hurried to apologize through her sobs. "I'm sorry, didn't mean to bother you." Henry and I grew up together, but after our families forced us into a business marriage, things went cold. We kept to our own lives, never crossing paths. But for some reason, I couldn't stand Emma. Maybe I even hated her. Henry called his assistant to pick up Emma, then looked at me with a smirk. "Why do you hate Emma so much? Are you jelly?" "Not jealous. I hate her because—" My voice cut off as I saw text floating across the sky through the windshield. "Because she's a fake coquette." I thought I was seeing things. "A fake coquette?" I scoffed. "I don't just hate her. I seriously hate you too. If you don't make her disappear, forget about the marriage." Soon, the assistant called back. "Mr. Liu, Sofian got drunk and went to the riverbank. She looks like she's about to jump in." I remembered how my dad's mistress was always on the edge of death, and my temper flared. "If you go to her today, we're calling off the wedding." His brows knitted together. His eyes darkened, signaling he was about to lose it. "You want her dead?" The car door unlocked with a cold click, and Henry's voice turned icy. "Get out!" I didn't want to stay around Henry anyway. I opened the door and stepped out. The black Maybach sped away into the endless dusk, leaving me feeling abandoned on the lonely outskirts. I stood by the roadside, trying to get a signal on my phone. Suddenly, a blinding light flashed nearby. The next second, a car sped by and hit me, sending me crashing to the ground. My calf got crushed under the tire. The pain from my broken bones was unbearable. The driver, scared of getting into trouble, didn't even bother to check on me before speeding off. Blood was pouring beneath me as I clutched my phone, trying to bear the pain. Luckily, I finally got a single bar of signal. I mustered the strength to call Henry. As soon as the call connected, he hung up. This was the outskirts. The nearest hospital was at least an hour away. I felt like I wasn't going to make it before the ambulance showed up. The sky grew darker as I curled up on the concrete in agony, the smell of blood filling my nostrils. I could feel life slipping away. Just as I was about to dial for emergency help, more text lines floated across the night sky. By the time the ambulance arrived, I had already died from blood loss. So tragic. Sophie's story ends here. If Henry knew the call he just hung up was Sophie's final plea for help before her death, he'd probably regret it forever. Whether he feels remorse or not, he'll definitely hate Emma because of it. The unforgettable first love is dead, and the stand-in takes over, leading to more abuse and a sad ending. The saddest part is Daniel. He doesn't know that the person he's loved for so long was right there when she died. He'll go nuts and turn into the villain later on. And his ending won't be great either. Enough. I can't stand seeing Daniel like this. I blinked to make sure I saw Daniel's name. He seemed so close to me. I tried to move, and the will to survive pushed me to use my last bit of strength to dial Daniel's number. He seemed so near. I tried to move, and the survival instinct kicked in, pushing me to dial Daniel's number. The call connected fast. His voice was cold. Speak. I suddenly felt like crying, even though things between us had been so tense. I didn't expect him to actually pick up. In a weak, shaky voice, I said, "I was in a car accident. I'm dying. Please help me." He paused, then immediately asked, "Where are you?" I gave him the location and didn't hang up. I was shaking from the pain, unable to say another word. In my fading consciousness, all I could hear was Daniel telling me not to be scared. In my memory, he had never spoken so many words to me before. We had always plotted against each other, fighting to the death. But at that moment, I felt like he was the best guy in the world. Moonlight pierced through thin clouds, scattering on the ground. The cold wind blew, and my body temperature dropped as blood kept flowing. I was shivering uncontrollably, struggling to keep my eyes open. Through my blood-blurred vision, I saw Daniel rushing towards me in a panic. Just before everything went dark again, more text lines appeared before my eyes. The unforgettable first love was saved? She didn't die. So how does the stand-in take over now? Why does this feel different from the usual novel tropes? Suddenly, it's getting interesting. Let's keep reading. Oh no, what should I do? I'm starting to ship them together. During the half-month I was in a coma, I gradually figured it out. The words I saw were called a barrage. From reading The Barrage, I learned I was the unforgettable first love who died young in a stand-in novel. Henry is the male lead, and Emma is the female lead. After my death, Emma took my place with her similar face, starting a tragic love story with Henry. I thought Henry no longer had feelings for me, but it turns out he still carried me in his heart. After I died, he couldn't stop thinking about me, leading him to both love and hate Emma. Honestly, the plot of this novel disgusts me, even after death. I didn't find peace but became part of the tragic love story between the main characters. The day I woke up, the barrage went wild. Sophie was awake. She really didn't die. No way. Daniel spent so much cash hiring the best docs in South City to save her, watching over her day and night. Of course she wasn't gonna die. Henry still thinks she's just throwing a tantrum by disappearing. He's still stuck on Emma, waiting for Sophie to come back and admit her mistake. So annoying. She better not wake up and start competing with Emma for the male lead again. It's the same old cliché plot. My fingers moved slightly, and Daniel, who was lying by the bed, immediately opened his eyes. He stared at me blankly for a moment before quickly calling for the doctor. While the doctor checked me out, Daniel sat beside me, his gaze fixed on me. Only after listening carefully to the doctor's instructions did he finally come closer. As he approached, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes. He really did stay by my side day and night. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. "Why did you call me?" I didn't know how to explain, so I just mumbled, I randomly dialed your number. Thank you for saving me." Daniel's dark eyes were cold, lacking any warmth. "The doctor says you're fine now. Since you're awake, call your fiancé and have him come pick you up." "Daniel," I called softly, "maybe we could be friends?" His tall figure stood against the light, shadows deepening under his brows, and he smirked. Being friends with Miss Rachel costs tens of billions. Daniel clawed his way up from the bottom. He had no connections, no escape. His methods were ruthless. He was infamous in the business world for his cutthroat tactics. 3 years ago, he snatched 2 projects from Henry. To get back at him, I deliberately approached Daniel. Surprisingly, he wasn't very guarded around me. I quickly teamed up with Henry to steal his most important business deal, causing him to lose billions. Those billions might not mean much to Mr. Chin now, but 3 years ago, it was a fatal blow that nearly ruined him. The last time we met, he grabbed my face and harshly warned me, "Miss Rachel, the next time we meet, I'll kill you myself." But this time, not only did he not kill me, he saved my life. I watched his back as he walked away and sighed softly. He probably won't ever talk to me again. At that moment, a line of text floated before my eyes. "Call him husband and see if he talks to you." I froze for a moment, then unconsciously whispered, "Husband?" Daniel stopped in his tracks at the doorway, his whole body tense. He really heard that. Seeing the barrage explode on the screen, my ears turned bright red, and I wanted to crawl into a hole. Daniel slowly turned around and asked me, "Did you hit your head?" I buried my face in the blanket, peeking out at him through a small gap. Based on the information from the barrage, I knew Emma was the daughter of the woman my dad had an affair with. Now my dad had acknowledged her as his daughter. According to the plot, after I died, my dad would have Emma marry Henry in my place. My dad wasn't too heartbroken about my death now that he had a new daughter, but back then he begged me to agree to the marriage with the Thompson family for the sake of his company. As expected, I'd never be more important than his business interests. Rather than going back now to be used as a pawn by my father and being forced to marry Henry, I might as well pretend to have a damaged brain. I popped out of the blanket and said to Daniel, "Back then my dad forced me to marry you to pay off his debts, even if it was a business marriage. You didn't have to be so cold to me. We could be friends." The night was dark and thick. Daniel's silhouette was hidden in the darkness, his gaze deep and unreadable. I weakly coughed. "Daniel, I want some water." He walked to the table, poured a glass, and then came over to me. He glanced at the needle in the back of my hand, then gently helped me sit up, carefully feeding me water. "Sophie, if I find out you're lying to me again, I really will kill you." His voice was low, cold, and dangerous. I bit the rim of the cup, slowly sipping the water. Hearing his soft warning, my body couldn't help but tremble a bit. When I looked up, more text floated by. "Oh, please, you were worried sick about her swollen hand from before. Who'd believe you'd actually kill her? Tisk, you probably just want to kill her in bed. Hey, keep it PG. This isn't a no man's land." I suddenly choked on the water and started coughing. Daniel set the glass down and gently patted my back, chuckling softly. "Take it easy. Your face is all red from coughing." Once I calmed down, Daniel tucked the blanket around me and sat by the bed, feeling my forehead for a temperature. He then dialed his assistant. With his calloused fingers, he gently brushed away strands of hair from my forehead, his deep black eyes carefully watching my expression. "Did you just say your brain is broken?" I shrank back under the blanket, too scared to say anything. Daniel's thin lips lost any hint of a smile as he spoke into the phone. "Tomorrow, bring in the best neurologist to check if Mrs. Chen's brain is really damaged." Wait, what did he just say? Mrs. Chen? Is he serious? Is this going to be one of those forced marriage plots? No wonder he's the crazy villain. This is getting intense. I was completely stunned. I was still injured and only planning to play dumb for a while to dodge the wedding with Henry, but it seems I've stirred up someone I shouldn't have. If I'd known, I'd have just kept playing dead. I turned my head slightly, avoiding his hand. There's no relationship between us. We agreed before the engagement that this marriage was purely business, and we wouldn't interfere in each other's lives. Daniel realized I had mistaken him for Henry. He narrowed his long eyes slightly. "Sophie, do you know what kind of person I am?" I shrank my neck and said softly, "A good person," in the darkness. Daniel's expression was cold and stern, looking downright scary. But at that moment, I was exhausted and Rachelpy, with my injuries still fresh. I quickly fell as Rachel after closing my eyes. In the hazy moments of drifting off, I caught a faint scent of a cold, woody fragrance in my nose, which disappeared as quickly as it came, and the barrage floated by again. "Ah, just 1 centimeters more, and you stopped? Daniel, aren't you supposed to be the crazy villain? How can you not even dare to kiss her? Seriously, are villains this pure-hearted now?" The doctor said that after the car accident, I might experience some memory confusion, so it's normal to mistake people. Maybe it'll get better after some time. I don't know what Daniel is thinking. He didn't deny being my fiancé and even visits me every day. The comments say he's doing it to avoid upsetting me and to help with my recovery. It seems like the little bit of kindness he has left is all being used on me, but my temperament is both moody and spoiled. Henry couldn't stand my attitude long ago. Daniel really shouldn't like me. 2 days ago, I threw a tantrum in the hospital and Daniel took me home. After learning my brain was messed up, his temper and patience seemed surprisingly good, no matter how spoiled I acted. He didn't seem to get angry. At one point, people around him thought he was the one who'd lost his mind. The weather quickly turned to early summer. sunlight streaming through the blinds, and even the breeze carried the scent of sunshine. My leg had finally healed enough to walk around after treatment. Daniel sat by my bed, slowly peeling an apple. The pale golden light shimmered on his tousled hair, and when he looked up, the sunlight just grazed his cold, dark eyes, giving an illusion of warmth. I stared blankly for a long time before snapping out of it and taking the apple from his hand. I took a bite and then threw it on the floor, tasteless. Daniel's eyebrows slightly furrowed, a faint trace of impatience on his face. Sure enough, someone as spoiled as me would be intolerable to anyone. In the 2 months I was out, even my father and Henry didn't care about me or look for me. It'd be good for Daniel to wake up sooner and realize what kind of person I really am. Unexpectedly, he stood up, picked up the apple from the floor, rinsed it briefly with water from the kettle, and then bit into it, his dark eyes narrowing as he looked at me. His expression showed a hint of danger. I immediately shrank back, whispering, "That apple, I've already bitten into it." Daniel's lips curled into a faint smile. Miss Rachel has never gone hungry, so she doesn't know the value of food. This seemed to be the first time he was angry with me in a long time. After finishing the apple, he quickly left for the office. He built his business from scratch and is busy every day. Over the past 2 months while I was recovering, although he visited me daily, we didn't spend much time together. Most of what I know about him comes from the comments. At that moment, another comment floated before my eyes. "Daniel hates it when people waste food. If Sophie keeps acting like this, he'll end up hating her sooner or later." So if I keep acting up a few more times, Daniel will start to hate me. My leg has almost healed now, and by my calculations, it's just the right time to go back and settle the score with those people. Suddenly, the comments began to increase. Daniel has been an orphan since childhood. He once fought wild dogs to protect his food and started underground boxing at 14, enduring countless beatings just to get a full meal. Even after Sophie's death, Daniel was the only one who remembered her. But this spoiled young lady really didn't deserve the madness he later showed in avenging her. Yeah, just think back 3 years ago. Sophie casually mentioned meeting him for strawberry souffle the next day. Then she stole his business and disappeared, leaving Daniel waiting for her all day in the pouring rain. Indeed, someone as heartless as Sophie doesn't deserve him. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to stretch up. I had planned to cancel the contracts with the Thompson family after returning, which would naturally transfer those businesses in the new city to Daniel. As long as the Lee and Lou families don't team up, Daniel would have no rivals in South City. How am I heartless? Lying in bed, staring at the screen full of comments accusing me of being heartless. I suddenly sat up. In the quiet of the night, I let out a long sigh. I truly deserve to die. I climbed out of bed, felt for the crutch beside me, and headed to the kitchen. I turned on the kitchen light and hobbled to the fridge, grabbing the ingredients. Since I'm picky about food, the fridge is always stocked, so making a souffle wasn't a problem. I cooked the batter, piped on the cream, and finally added fresh strawberries on top. Looking at the delicate dessert on the plate, I let out a cold snort. Let's see who dares to say I don't deserve Daniel. "Were you calling me?" My body stiffened for a moment as I slowly turned to see Daniel lazily leaning against the doorframe. I had no idea how long he'd been standing there, but I quickly found the answer in the comments. It seems he had been there shortly after I entered the kitchen, but I was too focused on what I was doing to notice him. I couldn't help but complain. "Are you a ghost, standing behind someone without making a sound?" He walked into the kitchen, tugging at the corners of his lips. "If you wanted something to eat, why didn't you call someone? Why sneak into the kitchen in the middle of the night?" I pushed the souffle in front of him. "I made it for you." Earlier, I suddenly realized I had misspoken and quickly shut up. Daniel paused, tilting his head slightly to look at me. "Miss Rachel has regained her memory and finally stopped calling me husband?" "I only said it once. I wasn't calling you." The smile in Daniel's eyes instantly faded, his voice dropping as he asked, "Then who were you calling?" Standing on one leg, I instinctively stepped back. My foot faltered and I nearly fell. Daniel reacted quickly, grabbing me by the waist. He held me firmly and lifted me onto the kitchen island. "Don't move." His deep voice echoed in my ear, strangely alluring in the quiet of the night. My breathing inexplicably quickened. His hands rested on either side of me as he glanced at the plate and then lowered his eyes to ask, "You made this for me?" I nodded slightly. "But I don't like sweets, then throw it away. Or feed it to the dog." He picked up a spoon and started eating the dessert. A smile slowly spread across his lips. "Not bad." Suddenly, he held the spoon to my lips. "Taste it." Aside from the man in front of me, pink comments floated across the screen. I realized the interaction between Daniel and me was getting too intimate. I turned my head slightly. "I don't eat sweets at night. They'll make me gain weight." Daniel grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him. "If you don't eat it, I might think there's poison in this cake," he said with a faint smile, a strange emotion flickering in his dark eyes. "I can't go down alone, can I?" I lowered my head and took a bite of the cake from the spoon, glaring at him. "Dog." Instead of getting angry, Daniel chuckled and continued eating while feeding me. The sweet smell lingered in the air, and soon the souffle on the plate was gone, even though it was just the two of us in the kitchen. The continuous flow of comments made me feel like I was being watched, making me extremely uncomfortable. After finishing the dessert, I hastily jumped down from the kitchen island. My mind went blank, and for a moment, I forgot that my left leg was injured. When I realized it, I gasped in pain. I reached out, grabbing the collar of Daniel's robe, pulling it open to expose his firm chest muscles. I stumbled forward, my head buried against his chest. A bit of cream from the corner of my lips smeared on his chest, which rose and fell slightly. Below that were his defined abs. Faint scars were still visible on his skin. The situation was too awkward. I froze until I heard his voice above me. "Sophie, what exactly are you trying to do?" I looked up, meeting his obscure gaze, and suddenly realized that all the comments had disappeared. Only one Frechelting comment remained, complaining about how the novel's censorship didn't allow anything below the neck to be described. Oh, so the scene in front of me, they couldn't see it. I looked at Daniel, my gaze drifting. "I just want to go back to Srachelp. Your leg is injured. Don't move around." The next second, I felt my body lift as he picked me up. The cool, woody scent from him filled my nostrils, making me tense, and my fingers suddenly tightened on his shoulders. He frowned slightly, looking down at me. "Are you a cat?" I quickly released his shoulders, my hands now resting awkwardly on his chest. This position doesn't seem right either. Daniel held me steadily as he walked toward the bedroom, letting out a soft chuckle. "If your mind is already healed, how should I deal with you?" I looked at him with innocent, harmless eyes. "I don't understand what you're talking about, hubby." Daniel's eyes darkened as he looked at me with innocent, harmless eyes. "I don't understand what you're talking about, hubby." His eyes darkened as he looked at me. "Does Miss Rachel think I got to where I am today by being easily deceived? This guy Daniel is getting harder and harder to fool." He gently placed me on the bed, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, giving him a light kiss on the cheek. Daniel's body stiffened, and his expression froze. Blushing, I whispered to him, "Good night." The next morning, I was woken up by my phone ringing. With my eyes closed, I fumbled for the vibrating phone under my pillow. On the other end, Secretary Sam's voice came through. "Miss Rachel, yesterday Henry asked me about your whereabouts. I'm currently using a private phone number, and only Secretary Sam can reach me." I rubbed my eyes. "What did you tell him?" "I said you went to Europe for business and wouldn't be back for a while." But next month is your wedding day. Are you still planning not to return?" I turned over and kept speaking. "I'm planning to run away from the wedding. He can marry whoever he wants. Sister Wong, you were right. Even if I'm entering into a marriage of convenience, I can't just pick any scumbag. I'm clear-headed now." I stared at the ceiling, suddenly remembering how Henry once mentioned feeling a sense of novelty when he met Emma. At that time, I didn't get what he meant, but after meeting Daniel again, I must admit it feels pretty fresh. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. As soon as I finished speaking, I locked eyes with a pair of pitch-black eyes in the corner, and the blood in my veins froze. It was Daniel, and then the screen filled with a barrage of WTF comments. I was dumbfounded, my mind going blank and unable to think. My face turned pale as I hurriedly hung up the phone and hid it behind me. "Why are you here?" Comments popped up before my eyes. "Why is Daniel still wearing the same robe from last night? Did he stay here all night? Help! What happened after Sophie pulled her robe open last night? Did he stay here all night? Help. What happened after Sophie pulled open his robe last night? Is there something my premium membership doesn't let me see? Weren't they too shy to even kiss before? How did things escalate so quickly? I snapped out of it and asked him in a trembling voice, Did you stay here all night? Daniel propped his head up with his hand, staring at me as he casually responded, I spent the whole night thinking about why you kissed me. And before I knew it, it was morning. He can think about something like that all night? Is this guy crazy? Wow, what a pervert. I love it. How does Daniel manage to be both creepy and pure? I tried hard to calm myself down. No, I couldn't calm down at all. Daniel had stayed in my room all night. That means he heard everything I said to Secretary Sam on the phone just now. I'm really doomed now. Daniel stood up and slowly walked over to me, a cold smile spreading across his face. I didn't understand it at first, but after hearing your phone call just now, it all makes sense. He grabbed my wrist, looking down at me with a fierce tone. Sophie, so all this time you've been playing me. The veins on his forehead bulged. He was genuinely angry. The force in his grip grew stronger, and for a moment I felt like he was gonna crush my wrist. I winced in pain and let out a soft groan. His expression softened slightly, and he immediately let go of me. I rubbed my wrist, too scared to meet his gaze, and quietly tried to explain. My brain seemed to have cleared up last night. Daniel let out a sarcastic laugh. So when you called me husband last night, you were fully aware. Tell me, what's your game this time? I met his gaze with teary eyes, the pain making tears well up at the corners of mine. I didn't. He reached out, his slightly rough fingertip brushing the corner of my eye, while his other hand gently massaged my reddened wrist. That won't do. You can't just quit in the middle of the game, or I might take revenge. Before I could react, he leaned down and bit hard on the skin between my thumb and forefinger. Dog! I couldn't help but curse at him. Instead of getting angry, he lowered his eyes and looked at me, chuckling softly. A comment floated across the screen. Did he enjoy being insulted? Pervert. I cursed him silently. Suddenly, my phone rang behind me. Before I could react, Daniel snatched the phone from me and answered it. Henry's voice quickly came through on the other end. Sophie, next month is our wedding. Where have you run off to? Henry must have taken Secretary Sam's phone. Daniel's expression darkened. I reached out to grab the phone from him, but he stepped back, and I ended up falling into his arms. He held onto my fingers, his palm radiating a warm heat that seeped into me. I mouthed the words to him. I don't want to marry him. Don't let him find me. Daniel paused for a moment, the ice in his dark eyes melting instantly. On the other end of the line, Henry started to threaten me. Sophie, I know you want to run away from the wedding. If you don't show up next week, I won't hesitate to replace you with another bride. You probably don't know this, but the Rachel family doesn't just have one daughter. Even if you disappear, you won't be able to stop the marriage alliance between our families. Daniel squinted his eyes, lazily playing with my fingers as he spoke. Her brain's broken right now, so she won't be marrying you. Henry hesitated for a moment. Who are you? Why are you holding Sophie's phone? Where is she now? Daniel looked down at my panicked expression and chuckled. She's obviously in my hands. Daniel held me firmly in his arms. His actions were both forceful and gentle. The cold, woody scent from him overwhelmed my senses, and I was too nervous to move. Sophie, Henry gritted his teeth, calling my name, but before he could say anything else, Daniel hung up the phone and tossed it aside. Daniel raised his hand, gently rubbing the top of my head, and asked in a low voice, Do you want to get back at your fiancé? I stared blankly, my mind completely blank, until the screen in front of me was suddenly filled with comments. It wasn't until that moment, albeit a bit late, that I realized I had nodded off. Is my brain seriously malfunctioning? Daniel's slightly rough fingertips traced the shape of my ear, glided down my cheek, and finally settled on my lips. After a moment, a flicker of a smile appeared in his eyes. Relax. His deep voice was both tempting and controlled. My nerves only got worse because the stream of comments didn't vanish like they did the night before. Aw, I'm so hyped. I'm about to scream. Wow, is this even something I'm allowed to see? I'm about to lose it. Wow, is this really allowed? After a long day at work, I thought, this is exactly what I deserve. I squeezed my eyes shut tightly, then opened them again. No way, I couldn't go through with it. Knowing people were watching, I started to speak. But then there was a knock on the door. Daniel instantly let go of me. Next thing, his assistant pushed the door open and walked in. Boss Chin, there's a document that needs your urgent signature. Daniel grabbed the paper, his eyes dropping as he tried to hide his eagerness. That's it? It's done? I knew it. There was no way I'd get to see this. I was all set. And that's all? Are you kidding me? I sighed in relief. I looked up and met Daniel's gaze. He tossed the document back to his assistant, leaned in close, and whispered in my ear, I'm pretty slammed today, but I'll find you tonight, in a moment of foolishness. I asked him, don't you ever srage help? He chuckled and added, make sure you're clean and ready for me tonight. Huh? Is this happening at full speed? It's always more thrilling with a dark female lead and a bad guy. I stared blankly at Daniel as he walked away. Suddenly, it hit me. He misunderstood. That evening, the maid helped me take a bath. Not sure if it was Daniel's idea, but even the bath gel had a special floral scent. I waited nervously until late at night, but Daniel never showed up. I was sitting on the sofa by the window, reading a book, when I unknowingly drifted off to search help. A loud bang woke me up instantly. I quickly opened my eyes to see Daniel standing at the door, one hand in his pocket, looking serious. Miss Rachel, did you search help well? He only calls me that when he's pissed. I tilted my head to look at him and asked, what's going on? The bedside lamp threw a cold, heavy light on his eyes as he just stood there, quietly staring at me for a long time. I lost a deal today, just like 3 years ago, because of a leak of company secrets. This time, it wasn't me. I was quick to deny it. Daniel leaned in slightly, gripping my wrist. I saved your life, yet you're still plotting against me. Do you even have a heart? His voice was icy, totally devoid of warmth. Then he suddenly pushed me onto the sofa. His cold breath was right next to me. I stared at him wide-eyed. Daniel, what are you trying to do? He pinched my chin, a cold smile spreading on his lips. You should know I stepped on a lot to get where I am today. If I lose everything, I'll die a horrible death. So when I die, I'll make sure you, Miss Rachel, come with me. He meant he wanted to be buried with me, even after death. Isn't that true love? I thought, he really loves her so much. No, how is that love? Clearly, he wanted to kill me. I blinked, and another comment floated into my view. Another classic tragic romance trope in a novel. No one speaks up to clear the misunderstandings. Even if they like each other, they won't admit it. Yeah, why not just clear things up? I took a deep breath and looked up at him. I already told you it wasn't me. You should really check for a mole in your company. Besides, I've started liking you now, so I won't hurt you anymore. The coldness in Daniel's eyes faded as he paused. Wait, did she actually speak up? Huh? What good would that do? In novels, even if the heroine defends herself, the hero never believes her. But they're not the main characters. Daniel stared at me, a faint smile creeping up his lips. Sophie, even if you're lying to me this time, I'll accept it. Then, suddenly excited, he leaned down and bit my earlobe. Aw, this is pure love. Who follows such a wild plot? Dog? I started to insult him, but he shut me up with a fierce kiss. The light around me dimmed, the chaotic words vanished, and I was wrapped in his towering shadow. Outside the window, the night was insanely quiet. All I could hear were our breaths and the erratic beats of our hearts. Daniel's hand pressed against the back of my head while his other hand grabbed my fingers. Our palms overlapped, our fingers intertwined tightly. The floral scent from the terrace mixed with the woody fragrance of Daniel's cologne. Overwhelming all my senses, his steady breathing grew heavier, gradually taking my breath away until I was gasping for air. Just when I thought I might pass out, he finally let go. He raised his hand, wiped the light smear of blood from his lips, and smiled at me. You can bite too, just like me. His husky voice carried a seductive undertone in the stillness of the night. Then, as if remembering something, He narrowed his eyes at me, almost forgot. You've been waiting for me to srachulp. As soon as I realized what he meant, he scooped me up and tossed me onto the soft bed. The next second, he tightened his grip around my waist, pulling me into his arms and whispered softly, Srachelp? I looked up at him in a daze. He pinched my waist lightly. Your leg hasn't healed yet. I'm not a beast. What? Disappointed? I didn't dare speak, hurriedly closing my eyes. Daniel might actually be a hopeless romantic, but his mind is definitely not broken. He took my phone and started investigating the leak. It didn't take long for him to find the traitor, one of his trusted aides who had been bribed by the Thompson family. On the day I was cleared of suspicion, he returned my phone to me. As soon as I turned it on, countless missed calls and messages flooded in, all from Henry. As the wedding day approached, he was genuinely starting to freak out. Daniel's voice had a hint of an apology. Sorry, I misunderstood you. I stared at the messages on my phone, not even bothering to look up. I have a record, so it's natural for you to suspect me. I'd suspect me, too. Daniel paused for a moment before continuing. But I took your phone and didn't let you go out. I found his words a bit weird. My leg is injured and the doctor told me to rest. Where would I even go? A soft laugh came from above, Daniel's voice uncharacteristically gentle. Then let me do something for you. I suddenly looked up, catching sight of the comments floating by. Are you two really this reasonable? Meanwhile, Henry called out Sophie's name in his srichelp, and Emma heard it, leading to a long argument. Seriously, a misunderstanding this big and you're not even going to fight? The bed is right there. Stop. Your wild imagination is hitting me in the face. I thought for a moment and said, I want to go to tomorrow's wedding. The comments suddenly got excited. I knew the plot couldn't go that smoothly. Daniel's about to lose it. That smoothly, Daniel's about to lose it. Daniel, hurry up. Time for the kidnapping, binding, and dark, twisted scenes. What kind of people are reading these novels? I suddenly felt a bit uneasy and was about to explain myself when I heard Daniel say, All right. I breathed a sigh of relief. I knew it. Daniel isn't as crazy as they make him out to be. But then the smile on Daniel's lips slowly faded, and his eyes grew colder, filled with possessiveness. I also received an invitation, but I'm missing a date. Oh boy, here comes the showdown. Before going to Srichelp, Daniel unexpectedly offered to massage my leg. His usual wild temperament, like a dog, was gone. But at this moment, he was inexplicably gentle. He must have felt guilty for misunderstanding me this time. And his conscience got the better of him. I looked down at him as he knelt in front of me and smiled. Thinking about it, it's only right that he serves me like this. Daniel lifted his gaze to meet mine, his expression a bit cold. Why are you smiling like a fox? You're the fox. Your whole family is full of foxes. He held my ankle in his hand, his dark eyes dimming for a moment, then asked, Is your leg better? I nodded. The doctor said it's almost fully recovered. Daniel suddenly asked me, I remember you mentioned that you like me? In a panic to save my life, I had indeed said that. I instinctively tried to pull my leg back. If you believe that just because I said it, then Bastian is really easy to fool. As soon as the words left my mouth, a series of mocking comments flashed before me. Sophie is tough only with her words, constantly expressing her dissatisfaction. Sis, when you said that, your face and neck were turning red. If you don't like him, I'm a dog. Daniel's cold gaze lingered on my flushed ears for a moment before he chuckled. Then he grabbed my chin and kissed me on the lips. After a brief kiss, he let me go and stared into my eyes. What we didn't finish that day. We'll continue now. I didn't understand what he meant. It wasn't until he pinned me beneath him and the subtitles in front of me instantly disappeared that I realized what he was talking about. He kissed my neck lightly, then propped himself up to carefully observe my expression. The lights in the room were turned off, and moonlight streamed in, softening the sharp contours of his face. He looked devastatingly handsome. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat speeding up. Are you scared? Who's scared? My breath was erratic, and I pushed him away with all my strength, cursing. Daniel, you bastard. When I said Srichelp, that's not what I meant. He pressed down on my hands, his scorching body heat seeping into me, and smirked wickedly. Save some strength to curse me later. He leaned down and kissed me hard, swallowing my muffled protests. His fingers brushed through my hair, then trailed down my arm, capturing my wildly flailing hand. And just like that, I was pulled into the depths of the endless night by him. The next morning, I opened my eyes, feeling sore all over as if I had been torn apart. Daniel held me tightly by the waist, pulling the blanket back up to cover me. At that moment, a flood of nonsensical comments appeared before my eyes. My face flushed with heat, and I immediately reached out to pull down the blanket covering Daniel. There were faint scratch marks on his tanned abs. The world fell silent again. Daniel stared at me, raising an eyebrow slightly. "Are you really embarrassed?" I didn't say anything. Instead, I picked up the watch he had left on the pillow and glanced at it. Then I tossed the watch onto his chest. "The wedding is already over. Didn't you promise to take me there yesterday?" A mischievous smile appeared in Daniel's dark eyes. "Didn't Henry say he was going to marry someone else? Why would I take you there to ruin such a good thing? No wonder he kept me busy all night, turning me over and over." So that was his plan. Furious, I kicked him. I wanted to go back to settle scores with them, now that the wedding is over. How am I supposed to do that? Daniel grabbed my foot and smiled. "Your leg has just recovered. Don't kick too hard. There's still a banquet at your house tonight. I'll take you there." I had almost forgotten that there was a thank you banquet scheduled after the wedding. As I tried to get out of bed, my legs trembled with weakness. I barely stood up before collapsing back onto the bed. Images of last night's intense scenes flashed through my mind, making me want to kick Daniel again. I looked up at him, stretched out my foot, and gritted my teeth. "Put my shoes on." Daniel knelt in front of me and helped me with my shoes. I raised my hand and brushed off the feathers that had fallen onto his black hair. He chuckled softly. "Sophie, are you petting a dog?" I nodded. The dog is pretty obedient. When I returned to the Rachel household, everyone looked at me like I had seen a ghost. Didn't Sophie run away from the wedding? How come she's back? Why? Obviously, she regrets it. Too bad Henry is already married to Emma. Even if she regrets it, it's too late now. Henry downed the wine in his glass and caught sight of me for a moment. He was stunned. He stumbled through the crowd and stood before me. "Sophie, what do you mean by showing up now? Do you regret it? If you just soften up and apologize, I'll divorce her and marry you right away. I've always had feelings for you. I only got together with Emma to make you jealous." It seems he's had quite a bit to drink tonight. He's even spilling his true feelings. I only realized this from the comments floating by. Even though he married Emma, I'm still the unforgettable first love in his heart. But he seems to have forgotten. I'm not only not that good, but also quite bad. I raised my glass to him and smiled faintly. "I don't mean anything else by it. I just came to wish you well. I hope you and Emma have a long and happy life together." Henry looked at me with a hint of deep emotion. "That's not what you really mean, is it?" "Of course not. What I really want to do is curse at him. He's already married. And yet he's still looking at me like this. Isn't it disgusting?" I didn't want to talk to him anymore, so I walked past him. He reached out to grab my wrist, but I avoided him. I threw the wine in my glass at his face. "Don't touch me. Get lost." The next second, a glass of wine was thrown onto my dress. I looked up and saw Emma. She stood protectively in front of Henry, biting her lip and timidly speaking. "Miss Rachel, if you're here to cause trouble, please leave. This is my home." It's my home now, too, of course. As the female lead of the novel, she says such shameless things with such a determined face. It really makes me look like the villain trying to ruin their relationship. I sneered and looked at Emma. "Then let's see if you can stay." With that, I pushed through the crowd and went upstairs. Back in my room, I picked out a dress from the closet. After changing into it, the comments floated before me again. I'm probably the villain they're talking about, constantly causing trouble and ultimately meeting a bad end. If I want to change my fate, I should try to please Henry and become sisters with Emma. How ridiculous. It's more disgusting to think about doing that than just playing the villain role for the rest of my life, regardless of the consequences. Suddenly, I struggled to zip up the back of my dress. I cursed under my breath. Damn, Daniel, knowing my leg is injured and I can't exercise, yet forcing me to eat so much every day, making me gain weight. The sound of the door opening came from behind me, and the zipper was tugged upward. I thought it was Aunt Anna and took a deep breath. Pull harder. A soft laugh came from behind me. What's this? Was Miss Rachel not satisfied with last night's service? The zipper was pulled back down. Gentle kisses fell on my back, warm breath brushing against the side of my neck. The comments before me disappeared. My expression stiffened, and I turned my head to see Daniel. How did you get up here? There are so many people outside. I climbed the wall. No one saw. How can Bastian say something so shameless with such ease? Because there are still more shameless things to do. Daniel flipped me around, lifting me onto the jewelry cabinet, grabbing my chin and kissing me hard. Something was off about him. His actions were forceful, not giving me a moment to breathe. It wasn't until I was gasping for air and hit him hard that he finally let me go. His hands rested on either side of me, trapping me in that small space with an air of absolute possession. In the mingling of our breaths, there was a faint scent of alcohol. In the darkness, his eyes burned as they fixed on me, filled with unabashed possessiveness. I caught my breath and punched him hard. You jerk! Don't take out your drunkenness on me. A flash of anger crossed his eyes, and he let out a cold laugh. If I hadn't been drunk, I would have gone out there and gouged out Henry's eyes. He's married, yet he dares to look at you like that. He really does talk like a villain. I tugged at his tie. Don't be so bad, or there will be a bad end. What bad end? You'll die a terrible death. He slowly took off his watch, smiling at me. I'll take you with me when the time comes. Bastard. He leaned down, kissing me again, silencing the words I hadn't yet spoken. When Daniel finally climbed out of the window, after half an hour of fussing, I changed my clothes and sat in front of the vanity mirror. Covering the traces of our earlier intimacy, the comments reappeared. As I walked downstairs, my legs were still a bit wobbly. All the guests in the hall turned their eyes on me. Daniel stood among the crowd, dressed in a tailored suit and wearing gold-rimmed glasses. He looked every bit the elegant scoundrel. I quickly averted my gaze, and as I stepped down the last stair, my father suddenly stepped in front of me. What do you mean by showing up now? What? Are you here to sabotage the marriage alliance between the Thompson and Lee families? I looked at him coldly. I've been gone for so long, and you never bothered to look for me. During that time, you even recognized a new daughter and arranged for her to marry Henry, making the Lee family the laughingstock of all South City. As soon as I finished speaking, a sharp smack rang out. My father slapped me in front of everyone. My head tilted to the side, and I tasted a faint hint of blood in my mouth. The room fell silent. Daniel's expression darkened. But before he could react, I stopped him with a glance. My father pointed his finger at me, shouting, "You ungrateful daughter! Get out of my sight!" I had always been obedient and had never defied him in public like this. This is my home, and not only that, I sneered. From now on, Rachel Corporation belongs to Sophie. Secretary Wong hurried to my side, handing me a document. I signed it and threw the document in front of my father. You always said that Rachel Corporation was your life's work. So for years, I didn't compete with you, letting you keep your position, but you seem to have forgotten that Rachel Corporation was built by my mother and you together. It was never just yours. You probably don't know this, but before she passed away, my mother acquired a large number of Rachel Corporation shares and secretly left them to me. So now, I hold the most shares in Rachel Corporation. I'm planning to call a board meeting tomorrow. Make sure you attend. My father stared at the document, dumbfounded. My gaze shifted to the middle-aged woman in a cheap house standing behind him. She was Emma's mother, my father's first love whom he couldn't forget even after marriage. If I had really died in that car accident, everything that belonged to my mother and me would have fallen into her and Emma's hands. The thought was laughable. I walked past my father and stood in front of Henry's parents. Once I'm in charge of Rachel Corporation, our collaboration with the Thompson family will be terminated. It must have been hard for you to put on such a grand show of switching brides today. Thompson's father turned pale with anger. Not working with the Thompson family? Who in South City would do business with you? I would. Daniel's voice suddenly cut in. The Liu family's business is bigger than the Lee family's because you can say things like that. Chairman Thompson. Daniel slowly walked over to me, tilting his head and asking, Sophie doesn't find that dirty? I was taken aback. Daniel smirked coldly, since Sophie doesn't have the habit of picking up trash. Why stay here? I nearly burst out laughing. Daniel's sharp tongue was truly something. Throughout all this, Henry had been staring at me intensely. He seemed to be mumbling something to himself. It wasn't until I saw the comments that I realized he was saying I would never find someone who loved me as much as he did, and that if I insisted on stepping into a pit of fire, he would no longer care about me. No wonder Emma, who stood beside him, was crying with anger. Without sparing Henry another glance, I followed Daniel out. Just as we stepped outside, my high heel twisted beneath me. A sharp pain shot through my ankle. I looked at Daniel's back and couldn't help but mutter, "Why are you walking so fast?" Daniel heard my complaint and stopped, turning to look at me. The next second, he squatted down in front of me. "I'll carry you." Everyone inside the hall was stunned. I only realized from the comments that what shocked them wasn't the closeness between Daniel and me after all. Relationships in our circle have always been messy. What shocked them was that someone like Daniel would actually listen to me. I stared at the man crouched in front of me, also a bit dazed. "What are you doing?" Daniel smiled. "Miss, how long do you want me to stay like this?" "Get on." I pressed my lips together and climbed onto Daniel's back, letting him carry me away. Daniel carried me, his footsteps steady as he walked towards the parked car. The dappled moonlight cast shadows on the ground. In the quiet of the night, he suddenly spoke. "By the way, I have some good news. They found the person who hit you with the car. He got into a car accident while speeding. Is he dead?" "No." "Then what's so good about that?" "He crashed into a cliff while being chased. Now he's worse off than dead. If he survives, he'll probably spend the rest of his life in prison." I know Daniel's character well. An eye for an eye. A tooth for a tooth. This accident likely wasn't just an accident. I tightened my arms around his neck and spoke softly. "If I had a personality like yours, would I not have been bullied?" He paused for a moment. "You're fine just the way you are. Let me handle these things." I lowered my head slightly, and a tear rolled down onto the back of his neck. Daniel gently placed me in the passenger seat and removed his glasses. His warm palm softly touched my slightly swollen cheek. "Does it still hurt?" I sniffled. "You've done so much for me, but I haven't done anything for you." "What right do I have?" "Well then." His knuckles brushed lightly against my cheek as he said, "Make me a few more meals. I really like them." I nodded, stunned. Daniel started the car. Since I'd been in an accident before, he always drove with great care. The ride was silent, with nothing but the quiet night around us. Only the flood of comments scrolled past my vision. Did Daniel want Sophie to marry him just now? Why didn't he say anything? Probably afraid of being rejected. Yeah, he knows Sophie might just be using him right now, and he's aware he's falling for her. Despite it all, this is pure, hopeless romanticism, and I'm obsessed. So, in the close, quiet space, I could hear the sound of my heart beating faster and faster. To be honest, I still haven't figured out what exactly my relationship with Daniel is. In the business world, we went from being sworn enemies to partners in a flash. And not just any partners, but ones with a lot of trust. The contract I had Secretary Sam send over was meticulously reviewed by Daniel's deputy, Vice President Rachel. The lawyers went over every word, afraid that I might have set some kind of trap. But Daniel just took the contract from the lawyer's hand and signed it without even looking. Vice President Rachel stomped his foot in frustration. "You didn't even read it." "What if that woman tricked you again?" Daniel's lips curled into a slight smile. "Then I deserve it." He said this just as I was standing nearby. And I overheard Vice President Rachel bad-mouthing me, which made me feel a bit awkward. Daniel threw the contract to his assistant and looked coldly at Vice President Rachel. "Say one more word, and I'll have you transferred to Antarctica tomorrow." After that, he walked over to me, his tone turning gentle. "Let's go grab some dinner." I got into his car, pulled out a copy of the contract from my bag, and started explaining the terms to him. He didn't seem to be listening very intently, glancing at an old alleyway in the distance. and then suddenly asked me, I remember you mentioned you're a bit of a germaphobe. Yeah, a little. Then we should probably stick to our usual restaurant. Suddenly, a comment floated across my vision. Daniel probably wants to take Sophie to the street food stalls he used to go to, but a place like that would definitely put off a lady like her. I pressed my lips together. I'm tired of the usual. Why don't you take me to a place you like? He chuckled. The places I like? You'd probably find them vulgar. I turned my head to look at him. I think you're pretty vulgar too, but I don't mind. Daniel let out a laugh, then stepped on the gas, taking me to the old part of town. The black Bentley stopped at the entrance of an alley. He took my hand and led me to an old street food stall. He asked me once more, Are you sure you want to eat here? Yes. I settled onto the plastic stool, and Daniel quickly ordered the food. Even though it was a street stall, the utensils had been sterilized with boiling water, making it pretty clean. Did you used to eat here often? Daniel handed me the bowl and chopsticks after wiping them dry. Not often. He tugged at the corner of his lips. The first time I earned a bit of money from fighting, I came here for a meal. I was so bruised and beaten up that I scared the owner. I watched his casual expression, feeling the pain in my heart. I always knew he had a tough past, but I didn't realize it was this bad. The food was served quickly, and he put some on my plate. Try it. The stir-fry had a salty taste, with a strong flavor of street cooking. I watched the smile on his lips and said, It's pretty good. I took a few bites of rice, and then heard Daniel ask me, I heard your dad is planning to cut ties with you recently. I nodded. They all think you've tricked me. Soon the entire Rachel Corporation will fall into your hands, leaving us broke. It's a miracle I haven't been tricked by you. I won't trick you anymore. Sophie, his eyes softened, when you said you liked me, was it true? I really meant it. Daniel chuckled softly. You sound like you're lying to me. Suddenly I got annoyed and kicked his leg under the table. Jerk, now that doesn't sound like a lie. At that moment, I suddenly understood the helplessness mentioned in the comments, the feeling that even when a novel's heroine speaks her mind, it often doesn't make a difference. This neighborhood didn't have the best reputation. At the table next to us, a few thugs arrived and gave me a not-so-friendly glance. Daniel reached into his wallet, pulled out some money, and placed it on the table. He said to me, Stop eating, I'll make you some noodles when we get back. He pulled me to my feet, draped his suit jacket over my shoulders, and wrapped his arm around me as we walked out. His grip tightened on my shoulder. Keep walking forward. Don't look back. I could hear the rustling footsteps behind us. Realizing those thugs were following, I was about to quicken my pace when Daniel stopped me. Wait, something's not right. I glanced back and saw that the thugs who had been following us had scattered. Suddenly, several large men appeared at the entrance of the alley. Before I could react, Daniel stepped in front of me, landing a punch that took down one of the approaching men. A flash of silver glinted in the night. I gasped. Watch out! They have knives! The sound of fists hitting flesh echoed around me. Daniel glanced back at me. Find a place to hide. I ran to a corner, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone to call the police. A man with a knife charged at me. I ran to a corner, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone to call the police. A man with a knife charged at me. I suddenly realized that all of this seemed to be aimed at me today. I backed away in panic, and just as the knife was about to plunge into my chest, Daniel grabbed the man from behind, locking his arm around his neck. The man fell backward, crashing to the ground. Daniel told me to run, but I barely made it a few steps before I tripped and fell flat on my face. Useless. Daniel walked over to me slowly, a faint smile on his lips. Miss, what would you do without me? I glanced at the men lying in various positions behind him, then practically crawled into his arms. Suddenly I froze, my hands slowly pulling away from his back. There was a warm, sticky sensation in my palm. It was blood. Daniel was hurt and brockleding a lot. He was wearing a black shirt, so I hadn't noticed his injury. The next second, Daniel collapsed to the ground, taking me down with him. His body temperature was always high, but now his hands were cold. I clutched his hand tightly, crying like a lost puppy. After Daniel was wheeled out of the emergency room, he was moved into the intensive care unit. The doctor said his vital signs were weak. Just as he had watched over me, I stayed by his side. I wanted to be good to him, but he ended up in a coma. For 2 months, I began to hate him, to curse him. Daniel, you idiot! Who told you to risk your life to save me? Did you ask for my permission? Weren't you the one who said you'd take me with you if you died? If you die on your own, I'll never forgive you. Even my own father wants me dead. So why are you being so good to me? A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I turned around coldly and saw Daniel's deputy, Vice President Rachel. What is it? Miss Rachel, those 2 old bastards have been imprisoned. Now, not only Rachel Corporation, but even Thompson Corporation is finished. I nodded indifferently. You can go back to work. Vice President Rachel immediately retreated. At that moment, the comments floated by. Vice President Rachel treats Sophie and Daniel the same way now. He probably realized Sophie is just as crazy as Daniel, and not someone to mess with. Haha, if Daniel doesn't wake up soon, Sophie might just take the title of the craziest love-struck character in this story. 2 months ago, the 4 men who stabbed Daniel were hired by my father. Their target was me. As long as I was dead, the company would fall back into his hands. I always knew I wasn't as important as profits in his eyes, but I never thought he would go so far as to want me dead. He was my only family. In this world, it seems that Daniel is the only one who cares about me, and without Daniel, the world feels incredibly empty. I knew someone like my father had dirty secrets, so I went mad, digging into our own company, and uncovered many long-buried scandals. Dragging down a lot of people with them, the Lee and Liu families were always closely connected. So when the Lee family fell, the Liu family went down with them. But now there are people from South City to North City who want me dead. I leaned over Daniel's bedside, murmuring, "Let me tell you something. Now it's not just my dad. Even the Thompson family wants to kill me. Here's your chance. Wake up and protect me. If you keep ignoring me, I'm really done for." My eyelids grew heavier, and in a daze, I felt a gentle touch on my head. I opened my eyes and met Daniel's gaze. I quickly stood up and pressed the call button to notify the doctor, but his hand lightly grasped my wrist. As if he had something to say, I leaned closer to him. "If you die, would you be willing to be buried with me?" His voice was soft, hoarse. The rain that had been pouring down on South City for 2 months finally stopped, and the clouds began to clear. The doctor said Daniel was lucky and was out of danger. Not long after, he was transferred to a regular ward. I sat by his bed, peeling an apple. Daniel leaned against the headboard, watching me with a lazy smile. "Why don't you just give it to me to bite into? If you keep peeling, there'll be nothing left but the core." I glared at him but didn't stop what I was doing. "Eat it or don't, I will." Daniel took a bite of the apple and raised his eyebrows at me. "I heard from Vice President Rachel that you went a little crazy while I was in a coma." I tugged at the corner of my mouth. "I went nuts avenging you and ended up losing Rachel Corporation. Now I have nothing, so you need to get better quickly. Work hard, and make money to pay me back." Daniel chuckled. "I'm still a patient." "And you want me to work? Do you have no conscience?" I shook my head. "No, I'm a bad person. If you regret it now, there's still time." "I don't regret it." The smile on Daniel's lips was faint. "I'm willing to be tormented by you for the rest of my life." Is Daniel confessing? Is it that hard to say I love you? The world of villains is always incomprehensible, but it doesn't make it any less enjoyable to watch. After the Thompson family went bankrupt, Henry took what little was left and fled to a foreign country to start over. Emma wanted to follow him, but her mother tied her up and sent her to another wealthy man's bed. One day, when I was out shopping, I ran into her again. She walked straight up to me, her eyes red, and said, "Sophie, I'm separated from Henry now. Every day, I'm stuck with someone I don't even like. Do you have any idea what kind of life I'm living?" She always looked like this, weak, pitiful, as if the whole world owed her something. I responded coldly, "If you don't like him, you can leave." "What does that have to do with me?" She shook her head. "He won't let me or my mother go. Sophie, you went after so many people, but you spared me. After all, we are sisters by blood. Can't you help me?" I found it laughable. She wasn't even resisting. "So why should I help her? Miss, do I look like a good person to you?" I didn't touch you because I don't consider you worth my time. And besides, if he won't let you go, can't you call the police? If you keep bothering me, I'll be the one calling them. I heard that later. The rich guy Emma was with dumped her right after their engagement. Not long after, Henry's business abroad became quite successful, and he returned to the country. Daniel, worried that Henry might come after me for revenge, wouldn't let me out of his sight, but it turned out Henry had already forgotten about me. The person he wanted revenge on was Emma, who had betrayed him. The next time I heard about them, it was on the news. After returning to the country, Henry tricked Emma into going to the Thompson family's old estate and locked her in the basement. A week later, Emma managed to escape while he wasn't paying attention and flagged down a passerby to call the police. When she was taken to the hospital, she was covered in wounds, barely clinging to life. It was said that while Emma was hospitalized, the Thompson family bribed her mother to write a letter of forgiveness for Henry. But Emma, always the weak one, surprisingly cut ties with her mother and insisted on suing Henry. Her luck wasn't all bad. When she was at her wit's end, a top lawyer suddenly appeared and helped her win the case, sending Henry to prison. I was lazily leaning against Daniel's chest, watching TV. He glanced down at me, chuckling, his chest vibrating slightly. "Miss, you sure love tearing my clothes off. Do you have a special fetish or something?" I took a bite of the peach he offered. It's the only way to get some peace and quiet. According to those who send comments, any scene in the novel that goes below the neck ends up getting censored. Only like this could the endless barrage of comments disappear from my vision. "The lawyer who helped Emma with the case seems to be your high school classmate. Did you arrange that?" I suddenly had a change of heart and felt like doing something good. Daniel hugged me tighter, lowering his head so that the stubble on his chin brushed against the top of my head. "Then could you do one more good thing?" I looked up and asked, "What is it?" Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he went back to the room and changed into a white shirt. He rarely wore white, but when he did, it gave him an air of purity, combined with that excessively handsome face of his. It made my heart race for no reason, my mind going blank for a couple of seconds before I muttered, "What do you want me to do?" He walked closer, his eyes slightly lowered, his tone serious. "When I woke up, I asked you if you died. Would you want to be buried with me?" I didn't quite understand what he meant. It wasn't until the comments flooded my vision that I realized. Daniel was proposing to me. I didn't know if I was touched or angry. With tears in my eyes, I punched his chest. "Idiot! Who proposes like that?" Daniel laughed, catching my hand and gently kissing the back of it. Then he pulled out a diamond ring and slipped it onto my ring finger. I froze. "You're not even going to ask if I want to?" He curved his lips into a smile. "I know you do." At that moment, the screen was filled with comments. "Woohoo! Happy ending!" So it turns out Henry and Emma weren't the main characters after all. Who would have thought I'd get to see the villains have a perfect ending? But unlike before, when Daniel leaned in to kiss me, the screen full of comments disappeared. The story ended here, and that long, heated kiss lasted for quite some time. Daniel's fingers slid through the hair framing my face, cupping my cheeks as he studied my expression through the lingering light. "What are you thinking?" I panted softly. "I'm thinking, from now on, the story will be just you and me." He stroked my hair, smiling as he asked, "Then, what should we do next?" I wrapped my arms around his neck, stood on tiptoe, and kissed him. He immediately pinned me down on the sofa. Outside, the sound of rain drizzled, and the dampness from the terrace seeped in, slowly evaporating in the heated air. My vision blurred with mist. In the long, deep night, there was only the sound of rain, heartbeat, and breath. Daniel gently wiped the tears from the corner of my eyes, laughing softly as he leaned closer to my ear. "There's something I think I forgot to say. Sophie, I love you, and I have for a long time.